You are now listening to Black Coffee, Crime, and Crochet, a true crime podcast where cozy meets criminal, hosted by Jasmine C.L. Prince. Grab your yarn, pour up an iced coffee, let's sit through the chaos.
Witnesses captured videos of the arrest showing Freddie screaming in pain, his legs appearing limp as officers dragged him to the van. One bystander described him as being folded up like a crab, which is a quote. Whew, all right, y'all. Welcome back, or if this is your first time, welcome here. This is episode 10 of Black Coffee, Crime, and Crochet. I'm so excited. I know this episode is out later than normal, but it's still Tuesday, so we're still good. Like I said, this is episode 10, and this is part 3 of the Indicted While Elected series, and we are covering Marilyn Mosby today, the prosecutor who was prosecuted. Okay, so for today, since it's later than usual, I do have an iced coffee recipe for y'all, but I'm not drinking iced coffee right now. I'm actually drinking an iced craft soda. Kind of like, maybe it's like a French soda. Anyways, I have a 7-Up drink packet. I mixed that in some hot water to dissolve the packet, filled my cup with ice, which is a 24-ounce cup, filled that with ice, and then topped it off with an original flavor LaCroix drink. So I think it's a Italian soda. That's what it is. It's an Italian soda. So I have a cherry Italian soda that I'm drinking during the episode. Okay, let me get it together. So, like I said, we are continuing our Indicted While Elected series, where we have been telling the stories of Black women officials, elected officials, who went from power to prosecution. So far, if this is your first time in the series, we have told the stories of Baltimore's former mayors, Sheila Dixon and Catherine Pugh. And listen, if you didn't listen to those episodes, please go listen to them. They were both crazy, right? Today, we're staying in Baltimore, like I said, for part 3. And this one did not go the way I thought it was going to go when I said I was going to do this. When I researched it, I was like, okay, because I get, even though Marilyn Mosby was in the headlines, I wasn't paying attention, I guess, because I didn't know. I thought I knew the story, but I did not know the story. So we are going to get into it, I promise. But, of course, before we get into it, we have to get into our segments. So, for Iced Coffee of the Week, we are doing a Sunshine State cold brew, which is inspired by Maryland's Florida connections, which you will see how that ties in the episode. It is a bright, bold cold brew with a dash of citrus sweetness, Florida oranges, yeah, and a drizzle of caramel, because sometimes life hands you bitter brews and you got to sweeten them up. So here's the recipe. Brew a strong cold brew coffee, and then in a tall glass, mix 1 cup of cold brew, a 1/4 cup orange juice, trust me, okay? And then 2 tablespoons of caramel syrup and a splash of cream. Stir that over ice and garnish with an orange twist. The result, smooth, energizing with a zing, kind of like Maryland's initial rise before things soured. So give it a try. It surprisingly tastes like, I'm not going to tell you. Just give it a try and let me know what you think, all right? And then for the crochet project of the week, listen. This polo is really not going to get the best of me. I had to put it down for a second and gather myself because it's just the sleeves still. So to distract me, I found a crocheter on TikTok, which I had followed her before. Sorry, that's my TikTok. I'm trying to find her so I can give her credit. I had seen her stuff before, but I didn't realize who she was until I went to her YouTube. So, let's see where it is, because I want to give her credit. I'm making a bonnet, basically, and she has an amazing pattern for it. So that's what I'm using. Her name is... Oh, where'd it go? We have to go to watch history. No, that is my history. Where is it? I know, yeah. I usually don't ramble like this. Please stick with me, I promise. I just really want to give her credit.
3 years ago, I'd be standing on this stage.
Sorry. My husband gonna be like, what are you doing when he goes to edit this? Okay, here she is. It's called the Haji Bonnet. Loving Haji. That's what she is. So her TikTok is at Loving Haji. And then her, of course, this is going to be in the show notes, but her crotorials, as she calls them, on her YouTube page is Loving Haji. And that is her on YouTube, Loving Haji. So I'm doing my bonnet from her pattern. And then she also shows you how to put a satin bonnet or satin liner in the bonnet. So that's what I'm doing to distract myself until I figure out how I'm going to get these sleeves together for my husband. But, okay, that is enough rambling. Oh, also, I just want to say that, like I said before, this is episode 10, and I feel like this is like, I don't know, a big deal for me, like a big monument, because me being somebody with ADHD, it's hard to follow through and be consistent with stuff. And so being here for 10 weeks, which is over 2 months, almost 3 months, is a big deal for me. Sticking with it and just, like I said, being consistent. Like, even though today is coming out later, it's still Tuesday. So, I don't know. I kind of feel a little proud of myself that we are here at 10 episodes. Yeah, so I just wanted to, I don't know, kind of pat myself on the back with that. But, okay. There we go with the prelims. We are getting into the episode now. All right. So, okay, so before we jump into the indictments, vacation homes, and all the cozy chaos, let's rewind, because to really understand how Marilyn Mosby ended up where she did, you got to know where she came from. So, Marilyn James Mosby was born January 22nd, 1980 in Boston, Massachusetts. And listen, she didn't just come from a law enforcement family. Sis came from a lineage, okay? Her grandfather, sorry, I have kids, all right? I don't know if you could hear that in the background, but they're fine. They're just playing with my husband. So anyways, her grandfather, George James, was one of the first Black police officers in Massachusetts, which that is dope, and later became the first African American to head the Massachusetts State Police, which is amazing. And then her mother, Linda Thompson, was also a police officer, and so was her uncle. So, like, public service ran deep in her bloodline, okay? But here's the twist. Even though she grew up surrounded by law enforcement, Marilyn wasn't raised in a house that was always calm. Her parents separated when she was still young, and she was mostly raised by her grandparents in a tough Boston neighborhood. So because of that, she was exposed to a lot early, and that included a tragedy that would later become part of her why. At just 14 years old, Marilyn's 17-year-old cousin was killed outside their home, supposedly mistaken for a drug dealer. He'd just come back from visiting her. That moment hit her hard, and Marilyn has said that that's when she knew that she wanted to go into law. Not be a cop like her family, but to be on the other side of the courtroom, a prosecutor, the person who could bring justice. And y'all, from that point on, she literally stayed focused. She went to Tuskegee University, which is an HBCU in Alabama, where she studied political science and earned her bachelor's degree. Then she headed back north and got her JD, Juris Doctorate, from Boston College Law School. While she was at BC Law, Marilyn met her future husband, Nick Mosby, and that's when her Baltimore chapter of the story begins. After law school, she started working for Maryland's Attorney General, then spent 5 years as an assistant state's attorney in Baltimore. So when she announced she was running for Baltimore State's attorney in 2014, people weren't really checking for her like that. Like at the time, she was only 33 years old. She had never held elected office and was running against an established incumbent. But Marilyn came through with that quiet storm energy, okay? With the message that resonated. She ran on a platform of accountability, fairness, and reform, and she won. So at just 35 years old, she became the youngest chief prosecutor of any major U.S. city and only the second Black woman ever to hold that role in Baltimore. So now remember that cousin we mentioned? So on the night she won, she held up a picture of him and said, quote, "I did this for you," which is dope. So from the jump, Marilyn Mosby's career was wrapped in purpose. Legacy, tragedy, and the desire to change the system from the inside out. She wasn't just any politician. She believed she had been called to do this. She came into office with a bold mission. Quote, "As a Black woman who understands just how much the criminal justice system disproportionately affects communities of color, I will seek justice on your behalf," end quote. Mosby vowed at her swearing in. And seek justice she did almost immediately. This is where I'm pretty sure y'all know the name Marilyn Mosby, because she would get thrust into the spotlight like very quickly into her term. But before we get into that, into the headlines, before the protests, before the national outcry, there was Freddie. So Freddie Gray is how Marilyn Mosby was thrust into the spotlight. But I didn't want to just gloss over Freddie Gray. I wanted to give space to him and his life because I feel like he's more than just a headline. You know, he was an actual person. So Freddie Gray, the man behind the movement. Freddie Carlos Gray Jr. was born on August 16th, 1989 in Baltimore, Maryland, which is crazy because my birthday is July 1989 and he's August 1989. So just thinking how he is gone is just, still trying to wrap my brain around that. But he and his twin sister, Frederica, entered the world prematurely, facing challenges from the very start. Raised in the Gilmore Homes housing project in West Baltimore, Freddie's early life was marked by hardship. Diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which I told y'all at the beginning I have ADHD, he attended special education classes but struggled academically, eventually dropping out in the 9th grade. Despite these challenges, those who knew Freddie described him as a, quote, jovial guy with a mischievous streak, someone who brought light to the often harsh realities of his environment. Freddie's interactions with law enforcement were frequent. He had been arrested multiple times, primarily for drug-related offenses. However, it's crucial to understand the systemic issues at play: the lack of opportunities, the pervasive property, and the aggressive policing strategies that targeted communities like Freddie's. So we're not about to victim blame or judge or anything like that. That's not what we're doing. So, getting into the arrest and its aftermath. On the morning of April 12, 2015, Freddie made eye contact with a police officer and ran, a decision that would prove fatal. Officers pursued and apprehended him, discovering a small knife in his possession. While the legality of the knife was debated, with some officials stating it was unlawful under Maryland law, Freddie was arrested and placed in a police transport van. Witnesses captured videos of the arrest showing Freddie screaming in pain, his legs appearing limp as officers dragged him to the van. One bystander described him as being folded up like a crab, which is a quote, with an officer's knee pressed into his neck. Despite his pleas for medical attention and requests for an inhaler, Freddie was not provided immediate care. Sorry, y'all. During the approximately 45-minute ride to the police station, The van made multiple stops. At one point, Freddie was shackled and placed in leg irons. Crucially, he was not secured with the seatbelt, a direct violation of department policy implemented just days prior. By the time the van arrived at the station, Freddie was unresponsive and not breathing. He was transported to R. Adams Cowley's Shock Trauma Center, where he remained in a coma for a week before succumbing to his injuries on April 19th, 2015. An autopsy revealed that Freddie had suffered a severe spinal cord injury with his spine 80% severed at the neck. His death was ruled a homicide. The uprising. Freddie Gray's death ignited a firestorm of protests in Baltimore and across the nation. Demonstrators demanded justice, not just for Freddie, but for all victims of systemic police brutality. The unrest reached a peak after his funeral on April 27, 2015, with instances of looting and clashes between protesters and police. The city declared a state of emergency, implemented a curfew, and called in the National Guard to restore order. Ooh. Low key, y'all, part of the reason why this episode is out late is because I mentally wasn't prepared initially for this episode. Because, like I said, I forgot that Marilyn Mosby was a prosecutor tied to this case. And I was just ready to come in here and kiki with y'all about fraud and scams. And then when I realized that Freddie Gray was included in the story, I had to mentally prepare, and that made me get it out later, which, if y'all could hear, I was literally, still am, trying not to cry because it's heavy. So that's why the episode is late. But we're going to get through it. So Mosby was barely 4 months into the job when she stunned everyone with a surprise announcement. Her office was charging 6 Baltimore police officers in connection with Gray's killing. Quote, "To the people of Baltimore and the demonstrators across America, I heard your call for no justice, no peace," end quote, Mosby declared in a live press conference. Quote, "Your peace is sincerely needed as I work to deliver justice on behalf of this young man," end quote. There were gasps, even cheers, at this unheard of move, a prosecutor indicting officers for brutality. Overnight, Marilyn Mosby became a national figure. Some hailed her as a hero seeking justice. Others ridiculed her as inexperienced or accused her of playing politics. Mosby, who comes from 5 generations of law enforcement in her family, emphasized that holding these 6 officers accountable, quote, "was not an indictment of the entire force," end quote. She walked a tightrope, invoking her own family of Black police officers and her duty to the community in the same breath. The Freddie Gray trials that followed did not go as Mosby hoped. One by one, the cases fell apart. A hung jury in the first trial, acquittals in the others, until not a single officer was convicted. Mosby ultimately had to drop the remaining charges. The outcome left the city divided and Mosby herself under intense scrutiny. In the eyes of her supporters, she had at least tried to do the right thing in the face of injustice. But to her critics, the failures in court were proof that she overreached. Overnight, this young prosecutor went from rising star to lightning rod. The local police union and conservative media vilified her. They said she rushed to judgment and accused her of grandstanding. On the other hand, many in the community still praised her courage, noting how rare it was for any officers to be charged at all. The Freddie Gray saga would come to define Marilyn Mosby's public image. Courageous reformer to some, controversial figure to others. And it would not be the last time she'd face a firestorm. Now, for this part, I think that she was courageous for at least trying. I don't know how she prepared or how like what could have been done differently. I'm not sure, but she tried, right? And I think that's a lot more that says a lot more than a lot of prosecutors all over the country. Um what shocked me was these 6 officers. Um because yeah, 3 of them were black, which I I don't know, that's shocking to me. I didn't expect that. So when they had released that when it came out, I was that's crazy. And then you see the picture of them putting it in there and how limp he is. It's just like I always do, I'm gonna put some pictures down. I mean on my social so y'all can see. But that was very shocking for me. But anyways, okay, let's move on. So, okay, so now we're gonna get into Marilyn Mosby's husband because he comes into play in this too. So her husband's name was Nick Mosby. These two were a true Baltimore power couple. Marilyn, the city's top prosecutor, and Nick, a savvy politician climbing the ranks. In fact, when Marilyn took on Freddie Gray's case in 2015, Nick Mosby was a Baltimore city councilman who was right there in the thick of things during the unrest. He went on national TV and passionately put the crisis in context. He said, quote, "This is bigger than Freddie Gray." Nick told reporters amid the 2015 protests, quote, "This is about the socioeconomics of poor urban America," he said, explaining that the anger in the streets was, quote, "decades-old anger and frustration for a system that's failed them," which, yes. Nick's voice as a black man on the city council complemented Maryland's actions as state's attorney. Together, they symbolized a new generation of leadership in Baltimore. Over the next few years, Nick kept rising. He served a stint in the Maryland legislature and then won a citywide race to become Baltimore City Council president by 2020. The Mosbys were young, ambitious, and seen as a unit. But being a power couple in politics also meant double the spotlight and eventually double the trouble. They wouldn't be on this podcast if it wasn't. So let's see. Yeah. Okay. So Marilyn Mosby's tenure as state's attorney went on to mix bold reforms and bitter controversies. She pushed progressive policies like instructing her office to stop prosecuting low-level offenses, including marijuana possession and sex work, to focus on violent crimes, a move praised by criminal justice reformers but blasted by others as contributing to lawlessness. And I see what she was doing there. I really do. Because this is where we get into, my husband and I talk about this all the time. How are you going to make it so that marijuana can be sold legally, but you still prosecuting people for carrying it and all of this, like the red tape behind legalizing marijuana and who it's really legalized for and who it isn't and who is still locked up for these offenses it's wild to me. So again, she's trying. Is she able to, fix everything? She's one woman, so I don't think it's fair to hold her to such a high regard as having to fix it, but she's at least shedding light to the issues. So she also pursued major cases against violent offenders and police misconduct. Yet, as crime rates in Baltimore remained high, critics blamed her policies for being too lenient, while supporters argued she was addressing root causes, which I agree with the supporters. She is addressing root causes, and you can't expect crime rates to go down overnight. Like, it's a process. And, like she said, she's addressing the root causes, so it takes time. Meanwhile, she also had personal ventures that raised eyebrows. She launched private businesses while in office and took dozens of trips to conferences or speaking engagements around the world, from Europe to Africa, saying these were to attract ideas and partnerships for Baltimore. She maintained that outside groups paid for her travel and that she wasn't using taxpayer money improperly. But local media, especially one combative TV station, began to question whether she was neglecting her duties or mixing business with public office. The scrutiny was relentless. In 2020, fed up with what she saw as unfair coverage, Mosby proactively wrote a letter to Baltimore's Inspector General requesting an investigation into her travel and business activities to prove she had nothing to hide. Which, when you think about it, that is a bold move. Like, you have to have had all of your I's dotted and T's crossed to personally write a letter inviting investigation into your life. Like, everything has to be completely in order for you to do that, because once you open the door, you can't pick and choose what they're looking at. It's just open season. Whatever they find from it is what they find from it, and that's what she came to learn. She says, quote, "The reality is that I have always been transparent and fully disclosed all information in accordance with my ethical obligations," she wrote in July 2020. So the Inspector General did look into it, and the findings weren't exactly exonerating. The report in 2021 found Mosby had been away from the city office 85 days over a 2-year period. And many of her trips hadn't been properly reported to the city's ethics board. It also flagged concerns about her private businesses and financial dealings. The IG forwarded some of these red flags to federal authorities, which I'm pretty sure she didn't foresee happening. Not too long after, in March 2021, FBI and IRS agents were seen at City Hall investigating the Mosby's finances. Those are 2 3-letter combination agencies you do not want coming after you. The FBI and the IRS, like, once they come, they already got you, basically. They're just tying a bow around it, but they're not coming unless they already know. So if that sounds ominous, yeah, it was. Baltimore's power couple had caught the Fed's attention, which you never, ever want to do for bad reasons. A particular issue under the microscope was a $45,000 tax lien the IRS had filed on the Mosby's property for unpaid taxes. Marilyn insisted she didn't even know about the lien when it was filed, and Nick repeatedly denied it existed, even when a reporter literally showed the man a copy of the lien notice. Like, imagine someone holding up receipts and you still saying, "Nah, I don't know what you're talking about." That's literally what he was doing. Eventually, in mid-2021, the Mosbys did pay off the tax bill, lifting the lien. But by then, investigators were already digging into the records. Like I said, it was already open season. So whatever you do at this point, it don't even matter because they already in your business. So all of this was unfolding in the public eye. Local news, especially Fox 45 Baltimore, hammered the Mosbys with investigative segments night after night after night. Mosby felt particularly targeted by this outlet. In fact, she took the extraordinary step, the extraordinary step you took the first time is what got y'all caught up. But anyways, she took the extraordinary step of filing a complaint with the FCC in 2021, accusing the station of, quote, blatantly slandered, dishonest, misleading, racist, and extremely dangerous, end quote, coverage of her office. It's not every day a sitting prosecutor tries to get the FCC to sanction a TV station. That's how intense the media warfare had become. For context, Fox 45 is known for its conservative slant and had been going after Mosby with a gusto that her supporters indeed found over the top and personal. The station, of course, defended its reporting as holding her accountable, but to Mosby and many of her community, the racial and gender dynamics were hard to ignore. Here was a Black woman prosecutor implementing progressive changes, and they felt she was being scrutinized far more harshly than her white male predecessors, which we're finding a recurring theme from the first 2 to this one. As these Black women are being held to a different standard than the white women who came before them. That's crazy. Mosby supporters believe that certain powers that be, from Trump's Department of Justice to local critics, had it out for her because she dared to prosecute police and shake up the status quo. Mosby herself repeatedly denied any wrongdoing and pointed out that no one had cared about Baltimore's entrenched problems until she had stepped up and started challenging them. Which, yes, yeah. This episode got me thirsty. Okay, so all this tension came to a head in January 2022 when the U.S. Attorney's Office announced a federal indictment against Marilyn Mosby. It was a bombshell. The city's top prosecutor was now being prosecuted herself. And the charges? 2 counts of perjury and 2 counts of making false statements on loan applications. Essentially, the feds accused Mosby of lying about her finances to improperly withdraw money from her retirement account and to get mortgages on 2 Florida vacation homes. So let's really unpack that in plain language because that's a lot. So I'm about to tell y'all what it all means, but I told y'all we was getting into some COVID stuff, and this is the first part. So the COVID-19 hardship withdrawals. In 2020, Mosby tapped about $90,000 from her city employee retirement fund using a special provision under the Federal CARES Act. Now, the CARES Act was designed to help folks hit by the pandemic by waiving penalties on early retirement withdrawals if you experience COVID-related financial hardships. Mosby signed certifications saying she qualified, that she had, quote, adverse financial consequences due to COVID. So think lost income, being quarantined, things like that. But here's the thing. Her salary as state's attorney was never reduced in 2020. In fact, she earned more in 2020, earning $248,000 than she did in 2019 when she earned $239,000. So 2020 she earned $248,000. The year before, in 2019, she earned $239,000. So the indictment said that she lied about facing hardship when in reality her income went up, not down, during the pandemic. Now, what did she had to say for this? Her defense was later argued that, quote, hardship could be interpreted broadly. For example, the real estate market fluctuations might count, or her private businesses lost potential income due to COVID. Which, the loss of potential income that's a stretch, but okay. So, but to prosecutors, this was plain old perjury, which I never thought perjury could be used in terms of forms. I thought you had to like verbally on the stand lie. Like I never knew that lying on forms counted as perjury. I learned something from this case. Not saying that I plan to do that. I just didn't know. Like when I heard her being accused of perjury, I thought they had her on the stand and she lied on the stand. So that was interesting. So they say she falsely claimed business losses to justify taking out those funds. And why did she want that cash? According to the indictment, to buy herself 2 sunny Florida getaways. So let's get into the Florida homes. So also in 2020, Mosby purchased 2 separate properties in Florida. One was a $490,500 home near Orlando, Kissimmee by Disney World, and a $428,400 condo on Longboat Key, which is a beachy spot on the Gulf Coast. There's nothing wrong with wanting some fun in the sun, but the feds say Mosby lied on the mortgage applications for those homes. First, she allegedly failed to disclose the IRS lien that we talked about on the forms, which is a big no-no because lenders consider outstanding tax debt when approving loans. Second, for the Kissimmee home, she signed a, quote, second home rider, stating it would be a personal vacation home, not a rental, and that got her a lower interest rate. However, she had already lined up a management company to rent it out as a short-term vacation rental, apparently planning to start renting it out almost immediately. So you said it was going to be a personal vacation home, not a rental, but you already had a management company. Like, clearly, there's no way she can get out of that. Like, you're clearly lying. Like, you already went. Like, it's not like after, girl, you lied on that. So, okay, so in other words, prosecutors say she lied about her intent to occupy that home in order to get a cheaper mortgage. Which just pay the money, girl. You made how much did she make? $248,000. Like, come on now. This is where it's just people just get greedy. So then the other one was the Longboat Key condo. So there was an issue of a, quote, $5,000 gift letter. So Mosby's loan application claimed that her husband, Nick, had gifted her $5,000 to help with the down payment. Again, to reassure the lender their money was solid. But investigators found that Nick didn't actually have $5,000 to give her at that time. Instead, they say Marilyn funneled money to him and they shuffled it around to make it look like a gift from Nick, which again, if you gotta do all that, you know you're doing wrong. That, in the Fed's view, was mortgage fraud, essentially misrepresenting the source of the funds. So it was a lot to take in. Perjury, mortgage fraud, tax liens, vacation homes, COVID relief funds. Not exactly the kind of headline any former or reform-minded prosecutor wants to wake up to. So Mosby, of course, pleaded not guilty and came out swinging. Her attorney at the time, A. Scott Bolden, blasted the indictment as bogus. He said, quote, "We will fight these bogus and politically motivated charges," end quote. The Mosby camp insisted she did nothing wrong and that this was a witch hunt, payback perhaps for her prosecuting police officers or for being an outspoken Black woman in power. In fact, her defense team filed motions to dismiss the case, alleging the prosecution was driven by, quote, malicious personal, political, and even racial ominous. They pointed fingers specifically at a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney and even an IRS agent involved, suggesting bias. To Mosby's supporters, it wasn't crazy to suspect a political vendetta. After all, Mosby had tangled publicly with the Trump DOJ. She was on Trump's Twitter hit list of officials he labeled as weak on crime, and she had been a high-profile surrogate for criminal justice reform. But the legal process moved forward. What followed was nearly 2 years of courtroom maneuvering, delays, and drama before the trials even began. There were debates over venue. Can Mosby get a fair trial in Baltimore given the local media frenzy? Her new legal team, Bolden eventually stepped aside after he got into a tiff with the judge. The man literally cursed on the courthouse steps and was held in contempt, which is a no-no. Argued that the jury pool in Baltimore City was tainted by the negative press. The judge actually agreed and moved the trial to Greenbelt, Maryland, a different federal court jurisdiction. And interestingly, the judge also split the two charges into two separate trials. One for the perjury counts, the retirement withdrawals, and one for the mortgage false statements counts, rather than one big trial for all four charges. So this was a small win for Mosby's team, perhaps hoping to make the case seem less overwhelming to a jury if separated. So let's get into the trials. Trial 1, which is the perjury, took place in November 2023. Mosby did not testify in her own defense in this one. The prosecution laid out how her salary never dropped during COVID and argued she lied on those hardship forms. The defense claimed she did face legitimate financial impacts through her travel business, one of the side businesses she had started due to the pandemic. After deliberations, the jury came back with a verdict: guilty on both counts of perjury. That had to sting. The once celebrated state's attorney was now legally a perjurer, according to 12 jurors of her peers. Which, I don't know. I'm not too convinced on this one, because no, she didn't lose money from her state's attorney job, but if she wasn't claiming it from that one, but from her side businesses, I feel like they should have looked into her side businesses to see, because she wasn't. I feel like the source of her saying it wasn't from her main job, but then you can also argue that those were your side businesses and not your main one. But again, if she was dependent on those side businesses for her, what's it called? Her lifestyle, if she had gotten because she did it because of the pandemic. So girl, I don't know. I think they got you right. They got you right. Because again, 248,000 was it? 248,000. So you would have been all right. You literally would have been all right. So then we get into trial number 2, mortgage fraud and false statements, kicked off in late January 2024. This time, Mosby did take the stand to defend herself, as did her husband, Nick. And oh boy, did Nick have things to say, y'all. In a surprising turn, Nick essentially took the blame for any financial messiness. He testified that he was the one managing or mismanaging their money, and that Marilyn wasn't aware of all the details. He even admitted that he had lied to the public about paying off that tax lien, trying to cover up their private financial struggles. He said, quote, "Ultimately, it was my mismanagement of the tax situation. That's come from it sitting here today in court because of my actions," end quote. He told the jury, essentially saying, "I'm the reason we're in this mess." He portrayed himself as a husband who tried to shield his wife from money troubles by hiding bills and debt, a dynamic that, if the jury believed it, might make Marilyn seem less culpable. If she truly didn't know, she couldn't be intentionally lying on forms, the defense angle went. But you knew something, because you had to funnel money to him and then shuffle it around to make it seem like it really was from him. So you knew something. Like, I don't, maybe she didn't know the extent of it, but she wasn't completely in the dark. I'm not buying that. The prosecution, however, wasn't about to let Marilyn off as an innocent, oblivious spouse. They pointed out that Nick's testimony, while maybe noble, showed the couple had been anything but transparent. In fact, prosecutors revealed evidence that Nick had repeatedly lied on his own tax returns in years past. For example, claiming deductions for charitable donations that, didn't actually happen. They painted a picture that the Mosbys had a pattern of playing fast and loose with finances and truth. The judge did limit some of the lines of questioning, not wanting to try Nick for tax issues in Marilyn's trial, which, again, we keep seeing these Black women held out on their own, when in every case there was a Black man tied to their case, but we only hear about what the Black woman did, which is interesting. But anyways, so, oh man, I keep getting off on these tangents and then lose my spot. When the second jury finally deliberated in February 2024, they delivered a split verdict. Marilyn Mosby was convicted on one count of mortgage fraud, specifically for the false gift letter related to the Longboat Key condo, exactly. Jurors agreed that she lied about the $5,000 gift from Nick, which in reality was money she had provided and routed through him, which I completely agree. However, she was acquitted on the other mortgage-related count, likely an allegation about the second home writer for the Kissimmee property. So when all was said and done, Marilyn Mosby stood convicted on 3 federal felonies, 2 perjury, 1 mortgage fraud. By this point, Mosby was no longer in office. She had lost her bid for a 3rd term as state's attorney back in the Democratic primary of July 2022, which was shortly after her indictment. The voters of Baltimore, facing a soaring violent crime rate and weary of the drama, chose someone else, Ivan Bates, to lead the prosecutor's office. And Nick Mosby, he too would face the voters. In 2024, after standing by Marilyn through the trials and even running for re-election as council president while she was in court, Nick was defeated by a challenger, an up-and-coming reformer named Zeke Cohen. The Mosby's era in Baltimore politics effectively came to an end. But Marilyn Mosby's story didn't end with the guilty verdicts. Next came sentencing and another battle, this time to determine her fate. Federal guidelines for her offenses could have put her in prison for some years. Each perjury count carried up to 5 years, and the mortgage count up to 30 in theory, though realistically her range was much lower as a first-time offender. Prosecutors pushed for a period of incarceration. They reportedly asked for about 20 months of prison time and even for her to forfeit the Longboat Key condo entirely, which y'all doing too much. 20 months, that's almost 2 years. It wasn't that, no. Mosby's team pleaded for leniency. She was a public servant with no prior record, exactly, a mother of 2 young daughters, and they argued that she had not truly harmed anyone financially. The loans were paid. There was really no damage. Many community members wrote letters on her behalf. In May 2024, Marilyn Mosby received her sentence. 12 months of home detention plus 3 years of 3 years of probation, supervised release, and 100 hours of community service. In other words, she avoided prison time. The judge ordered that she serve 1 year confined to her home with an electronic monitor. Fittingly or ironically, a kind of sentence she might once have recommended for certain defendants. Additionally, she was ordered to hand over a chunk of any profit from the sale of the Longboat Key condo, essentially forfeiting 90% of the condo's appreciated value as a penalty. Mosby arrived at the courthouse that day with her 2 daughters, who wore white dresses like their mom, a scene observers described as almost symbolically pure and defiant. A small crowd of supporters outside actually chanted her name as she went in. Even her now estranged husband, Nick, yes, there are reports that the 2 have separated, showed up later in the hearing. It was a surreal capstone to her fall. The once top prosecutor of Baltimore, now a convicted felon on house arrest. Still, Mosby did not back down on her narrative. She maintained her innocence through it all, in fact, vehemently so. She reiterated that she believed she was targeted unjustly, invoking how the case against her ramped up under the Trump administration after she had charged the officers in the Gray case. And even after sentencing, Mosby wasn't done fighting. She took the unprecedented step of seeking a presidential pardon from President Joe Biden. Yep. That's what I said. She essentially appealed to the White House for clemency, as if she were a civil rights martyr wrongfully convicted. Mosby and her allies launched a public campaign arguing that her convictions were not reflective of criminal intent, but the result of political payback. The local NAACP chapter and more than a dozen churches and organizations signed an open letter urging Biden to pardon her. Even Dr. Bernice King, the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr., publicly backed Mosby's plea for a pardon, framing Mosby's plight as the outcome of her courageous stance against police brutality and her progressive reforms. It was a long shot by any measure. Presidential pardons are rare and typically not granted by local officials for financial crimes, especially not so soon after conviction. And indeed, when President Biden issued a slate of pardons in late 2024 for some nonviolent offenders, Marilyn Mosby's name was not on the list. As of this episode, her request for a pardon remains unmet, and she continues to serve out her sentence from the comfort of her home while her law license hangs in the balance. So, how do we make sense of Marilyn Mosby's saga? It's a story with many layers: ambition and hope, racial justice and tragedy, power and controversy, downfall and defiance. One minute she was on stage at gala events hailed as a, quote, young progressive prosecutor to watch. The next she was being perp-walked figuratively by the feds. It's a kind of story that makes you wonder about the thin line between reformer and rule breaker, between being targeted and being guilty. Baltimore has now seen 3 of its high-profile women leaders go down in scandal: Dixon, Pugh, Mosby. Each case very different, yet all raising similar questions about trust, accountability, and redemption. This had it all. Literally a historic election upset that put a 35-year-old in charge of Baltimore's justice system, a high-stakes police brutality case that made her a household name, media showdowns and allegations of racist coverage, side ventures from travel businesses to beachfront condos, secret withdrawals from a retirement fund under the guise of COVID hardship, 2 trials with split verdicts and family drama on the witness stand, a sentencing with no prison time but plenty of consequences, and even a last-ditch appeal for a presidential pardon backed by civil rights leaders. From the heights of reform to the depths of legal trouble, Marilyn Mosby's journey is a cautionary tale and a tragic drama all at once. That was a lot, y'all. So, for the Sip or Spill segment, here's the big question we're pondering this week, and I really want you to weigh in on socials. Was Marilyn Mosby the victim of a political vendetta, or did she dig her own grave by breaking the public's trust? So, sip, keep it mellow if you feel Marilyn Mosby was unfairly targeted for being a change maker, that her prosecution was more about politics and payback for charging those officers and shaking up the system than about true malice on her part. In this view, she tried to help her city and got ensnared in technicalities and trumped up charges. Maybe you even think she deserves a second chance, maybe even that pardon, because her intentions were good despite the mistakes. Spill the tea, if you think rules are rules. No matter how well-intentioned Mosby was, lying on official documents and financial forms is a serious breach of trust. If a top law enforcement official bends the law for herself, that's a big deal. Perhaps you believe that being a reformer doesn't put you above accountability and that Mosby's downfall is ultimately on Mosby. In other words, she knew better and she still crossed lines, so consequences were deserved. Whatever your take is tough, thought-provoking. It's a tough, thought-provoking debate. But please head over to Instagram or Threads at Black Coffee Crime Crochet and let me know. Are you sipping or spilling on Marilyn Mosby's fate? And I'll share some of your responses on the next episode. So, as we put down our hooks and finish the last sips of our drinks, let's take a moment to reflect. Marilyn Mosby's story is one of hope and disappointment, justice sought and justice derailed. It's complex, much like Baltimore itself, a city that has cheered and jeered in her turn. Here at Black Coffee Crime Crochet, we don't pretend there are easy answers. Instead, we talk it out, stitch it out, and try to find lessons and warmth amid the chaos. In Marilyn's rise, we saw the power of a young Black woman determined to change a broken system. In her fall, we're reminded that integrity and transparency are as vital in public service as passion and innovation. Perhaps the truth of her case lies somewhere in between. A capable, charismatic leader who did a lot of good, but who also made some dubious choices that opened the door for her enemies. It's a cautionary tale to check the ego, mind the details, and surround yourself with honest counsel, especially when you're trying to reform from within. For us makers and true crime lovers, maybe the lesson is this. Like a crochet project is made one stitch at a time, drop a stitch or a detail on a form, and the whole pattern can unravel. But with care, patience, and maybe a little bit of help, you can also pick up drop stitches. You can mend what's torn. Marilyn Mosby is young, only in her 40s, and who knows, perhaps her story isn't finished. Maybe one day she'll find a way to contribute again, to earn redemption in the eyes of those who lost faith. Stranger things have happened. Baltimore loves a comeback story almost as much as it hates a scandal. In the meantime, we'll keep sipping our coffee and crafting our comfort. Baltimore's been through a lot, and so have the Mosbys. Here's for hoping for healing all around, for a city that deserved better, for a woman who aimed high and fell hard, and for a justice system that, at the end of the day, we rely on to be fair and equal. As we wrap up, I'm literally wrapping up my drink here. It was very good. So it's a reminder that even when things come apart, we can use our own hands and our hearts to stitch them back together. So stay warm, stay hopeful, and take care of each other. And don't forget that if you love the show, please rate and review wherever you listen to it. If you leave a 5-star review on Apple, I would love that. 5-star rating on Apple and review it on Apple. And then on Spotify, leave a comment. I always read them and respond. Like I said, follow me on socials. I am at Black Coffee Crime Crochet. And that is going to wrap up our Indicted While Elected series. I very much enjoyed it. Cheers to 10 episodes, and I will see y'all next week. Bye.
Disclaimer. Great effort is made to ensure that all materials used in Black Coffee, Crime, and Crochet adhere to fair use guidelines. No copyright infringement is intended. If you are the copyright owner or represent the owner of any material used in this content and have concerns about its use, please contact me and I will promptly address the issue.